next, and some of those updates. So let's jump into this week in geopolitics, Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 91. Right. So just very briefly, a couple of updates from last week. Last week, we mainly covered the Syria situation, and we also covered the Epstein files and how those are related to each other. And so Israel and Syria basically reached a ceasefire. That is the current state of events. There was intervention from the US, and I gave my reasons last week why I actually think that this wasn't a planned one, but it was an escalation in towards Israel basically taking advantage of the situation in order to gain more leverage into its negotiations for the genocide that is happening right now. And we had some announcements as well after the ceasefire that Saudi Arabia, an important part of the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, and Syria signed a $6.4 billion worth of deals. And this is all around, I believe, the GCC, if they can get Netanyahu to negotiate his exit, and he is representing the military-industrial complex and the last bits of profits, while he monetizes a genocide, and he's using his leverage in order to try and get full freedom, as I covered, and I'll be covering again today on this week. And the GCC, I think, have done all they can, but we'll dive more into that as well. Negotiating with Syria is the type of indication that I'm looking for that the GCC is going to be the new regional group of powers as they enter into this decolonization process from the US proof of weapons network and move towards harnessing energy for artificial intelligence. If they can make the area investable, which requires this negotiation between the weapons network and the various factions. Okay, so last week we also covered Epstein. There was a few more updates. I created a blog called Is Trump Blackmailed by Epstein? That's where I go through a documentary with Ryan Dawson that goes through all of the flows for people that are interested in this topic. And there's a short AI summary on that blog post as well. You just go to simondixon.com, type in the blog, or click on the blog link, and in the search bar at the bottom, I think it is, type in Epstein, and you can find all the different posts there. But Trump basically came out and officially asked the Justice Department to release to the grand jury testimony with respect to the Jeffrey Epstein files. And so this pressure from Trump support, which I think is also strategic leverage between the proof of weapons network that controls the files, is working as a strategic weakening so that Trump stays obedient as a compromise and good president for the proof of weapons network. Wall Street Journal also came out and said that the Justice Department told Trump in May that his name is among many in the Epstein files. And then Ghislaine Maxwell is using it in order to leverage her negotiation and whatever she's going to say, which we can't trust shit about. Ghislaine Maxwell, who is the handler for Jeffrey Epstein pedophilia and blackmail ring, who is the daughter of Robert Maxwell, who was a Mossad agent, and Jeffrey Epstein had deep connections, the neighbor of Howard Lutnick, who's always behind Trump in the administration, and the Israeli presidents and prime ministers that were always visiting Jeffrey Epstein, and all the things that have been released since. You can check out my blog for those that want to dig deeper into this. Well, Ghislaine Maxwell, who was funded by Lex Wexner and all of the banksters and financiers, and Jamie Dimon, and provided the JP Morgan account for much of these crimes, that settled about $280 million with victims. Ghislaine Maxwell said that they will testify on August the 11th. And so apparently we're going to get a new testimony with the list from Ghislaine Maxwell. So that's the next stage in the drama. There was a quote, the Department of Justice is cooperating and will help facilitate the deposition at the prison. So there's going to be a deposition at the prison and a testimony. And Trump says that he will not destroy Elon Musk's companies. So remember I said that Elon's using this, knowing that Trump doesn't have access to the files, knowing that the banksters are the ones that are implicated on the files and Trump's name's there. So it will never be released. And so Elon decided to take strategic advantage in order to get more negotiations for the technical industrial complex faction of the proof of weapons network. And suddenly Trump comes out and says, yes, I don't want to destroy Elon Musk's and any of his companies. And Elon, I want him to thrive like never before. And so you got the pivot there as a result of that. And to me, I interpret this as more evidence in the file that governments are always subordinate to the proof of weapons network. And proof of weapons network is determined by shareholders. And if an executive is a founding executive, also a shareholder, then they're a high net worth constitute of the proof of weapons network, as well as one of the portfolio companies, which would give you more power than a member of government or a president. And so my theory was Elon is strategically factioning off the technical, the Trump administration fan base based upon the weaponization, knowing that this will never be released. And so this kind of ties into my general theory of following the money in order to understand the control structure of wealth and the asset managers as well. So founder entrepreneurs, they do have significant power in the proof of weapons network. I also want to update on how I think the proof of weapons network, via its vassal state US, via Trump, is kind of seeing the escalations with China and Taiwan. And so this one I haven't covered for a while. And so based upon the current situation, just wanted to give some updates, and then I'll do the same for Russia, Ukraine. And then we'll move forward with the final part of this section, a few more updates on This Week in Geopolitics, and one of the new blogs that I'll be releasing in terms of how you can fight back and boycott the proof of weapons network. Okay. So currently, I do not believe, based upon following the money, that China has any plans to invade Taiwan. Because basically it cannot and will not turn Taiwan into Ukraine. Because until chips are secured, semiconductor chips, both in the proof of weapons network with America as a host country for the technocracy and China, nobody can afford to have Taiwan turn into Ukraine because it would be trillions of dollars of disruption, and it would be a lose-lose game for both China and the proof of weapons network. And so it doesn't care about Taiwan, obviously. I mean, the military-industrial complex has no care about countries. If you want to turn a country into Ukraine for profit, it will do that. That's why it has all these covert operations. But Taiwan has its silicon shield, which it's holding on to. And so it will always weaponize foreign soldiers, send them to the slaughterhouse for profits. There's no ethical consideration. The military have been doing that for years. They'll just create a new narrative that they're defending democracy in Taiwan from communism will always be the story. Sending foreign people and creating and funding militias, that's the military industrial complex's playbook. It's always done that. We've seen this in Ukraine, and we're also seeing that in Israel right now. As I talked about, Zionism was an ideology that was created in order to recruit an army to engage in crimes against humanity, to conquer land, because America needed access to American interests, needed access to oil as well as British interests. And so over the years, it had the Balfour Declaration and everything I've covered in previous. But is more than happy to radicalize a population, recruit an army, turn them into engaging in ethnic cleansing and genocide. And that's what's happening in Ukraine and Israel right now. Essentially, Ukraine is believing that they're fighting for their country and democracy. And I'll cover more on the chances of that. And the same is happening in Israel, where they believe they're fighting for Judaism, and military is just profiting from all of this. But right now, the proof of weapons network is doing the least profitable thing, which is profiting from defense. Now, normally, when the proof of weapons network military industrial complex is profiting from defense only, there has to be significant technical industrial complex, pharmaceutical industrial complex, or financial industrial complex profits to make up for the BlackRock portfolio. And so a China invasion would just be too much of a massive gamble. And so it's making up for the profits because it's funding and creating all the chips for artificial intelligence at the moment. So China knows that the proof of weapons network can't basically hold on to Taiwan forever, but it needs to allow Taiwan to flow smoothly until it has its own independent chip manufacturing units within the host country of the largest capital markets for the proof of weapons network, which is US. And so the proof of weapons network also knows that China knows this as well. So this is essentially why they are supporting Taiwan through the defense, and they're also supporting the techs, but they're doing deals and getting Trump to negotiate a deal with Taiwan and TSMC, the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation, to bring those chip manufacturing over to the US. Because eventually the military industrial complex is happy to profit from this, but at the moment it's too much of an asset to technical, and so finance is funding that as well, and they're making a load of money. But defense is never as profitable as war, and so this is how they're managing the portfolio at the moment. Eventually, once the US has their own chip manufacturing factories, which was a policy by the Biden administration and the $55 billion investment, and has been continued by the Trump administration through negotiation of deals with Taiwan and TSMC. At the same time, Intel, its own chip manufacturer, is a dinosaur company. It's really lost here. Like it's the amount of share value is lost. So it has to work with Taiwan. And obviously, Taiwan needs the rare earth minerals, which brings us into the Ukraine, Greenland, Mexico, Canada, types of situations, because China has a monopoly on those rare earth minerals that Taiwan needs. And so America long-term has to build up that before there can be any profit from the military industrial complex and the proof of weapons network. Once Taiwan knows this, because it knows that it is at risk by both China's long-term goal of reunification, but without having the complete economic destruction and the potential profits from the US proof of weapons network as well. And so by building these factories in the US and doing deals between TSMC, this is kind of signaling to the proof of weapons network that it's not interested in a war, and China will not invade Taiwan at the moment until this situation is reunification and stabilize. And so at the same time, this is basically incentivizing China not to act now. And so this is why I believe that there will only be militarization in Asia Pacific, in Japan, in Philippines, if they could, Indonesia. in Indonesia and Taiwan, which is why you're seeing these Asian countries as the first ones that are being negotiated into the tariffs, as well as the vassalization of any of the strategic assets in the multipolar world order, because they're being pushed closer to China. And so the proof of weapons network wants to get as many distressed acquisitions that I covered in the macro section in the private equity market as well. So the proof of weapons network is signaling to China that there's an opportunity to take Taiwan without turning it into Ukraine in the future by rebuilding these factories as well. And so China knows it can reunify, which is its long-term goal, but there won't be the complete global economic destruction by vassalizing Taiwan into Ukraine, and the Silicon Shield holds as well. And so at the moment, China's just watching this progress. And that, I think, is deeply interconnected into the trade war and why we're having many of these different... And that's why China, powering BRICS, is building as well as many of its oil strategic reserves, its gas strategic reserves, and just crushing it on all areas at the moment, because it definitely wants Taiwan long-term as part of its one China policy, but it will wait 100 years if it needs to, because that's the way that China works. This is its defense against the century of humiliation. And this is why it's patience, and it is working with the Global South, partnering with the GCC, because the Gulf is propping up the petrodollar through Saudi Arabia, but its number one customer is China. And so China is normalizing between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and Iran saying we'll only stop the resistance if there is a Palestinian cause, which is strategically weakening Israel. But Israel is a big part of the military-industrial complex, which requires, and I'll be covering in the final section, the American military-industrial complex to retreat, which means doing a deal with Netanyahu. Netanyahu wants his freedom. So you've got this one psychopathic, genocidal maniac, which is weaponizing genocide and starvation, holding up all of this deal and all of this progress, because the military want the last bits of profits. And this is taking longer than I thought. So I've gone a little bit ahead anyway. So meanwhile, Trump is basically saying that the United States will send Patriot air defense systems to Ukraine. And so all of the profits has to come for military from Ukraine and Europe, which is why we got this whole strategic weakening campaign in Europe, defense profits in Asia Pacific, and the last bits of profits from the Middle East held up by these psychopathic negotiations when you follow the money. So what was announced in the media is that Trump has privately encouraged Ukraine to step up deep strikes on Russian territory. And it has asked Zelensky, quote, if he could strike Moscow. And this was according to a Financial Times report. The reason for this is because America needs growth, America needs GDP, and Europe is being vassalized and weakened. So Trump went to the NATO summit and said, the ECB, please print a bunch of money, and then European countries spend it on the US military-industrial complex, Palantir, surveillance, all that type of stuff. And then $1 trillion can be made, and this essentially makes up for the growth that America needs, and that will create lots of inflation within Europe as well against the European people. It's basically called GDP on the US dollar proof of weapons network, and whether the government prints it in Europe or the government through Big Beautiful Bill, that's how you basically stimulate economic growth for the dollar. You can sell weapons, basically to the last Ukrainian. And so Zelensky, that is also an agent for the Proof of Weapons Network, will continue to say, we're defending Ukraine. And so you can get the European Union to take on the debt, take on the inflation, You can boost the US stock market. The proof of weapons network is happy. The military industrial complex is happy. The financial industrial complex is happy. Ukrainian is going deeper and deeper into debt. It's now got $181 billion, which is over 100% of its GDP. They're already skipping $600 million in payments on basically GDP warrants. And so BlackRock is issuing these warrants against their GDP. They're completely economically vassalized. And so Ukraine is complete toast from this operation, but they need the media to still believe that we're defending democracy. This is completely unsustainable from both humanitarian and financial perspective from Ukraine. This is why we started to see in Kiev the first signs of uprising and riots against Zelensky, because people are starting to realize what's happening as more and more information is going. There is an absolute debt spiral in Western, taxpayers, basically, and BlackRock can profit from their portfolio. And this is why none of the leaders in the West are working in the interest of European people. We heard from the foreign minister of Russia, Sergei Lavrov. He said Russia is not concerned about US President Trump's threats against BRICS and also the aggression that happened in Netanyahu's visit at the White House. And basically, let's follow the money and understand why this is such a tragedy. It's such a human tragedy. We're led to believe that we're supporting democracy. But the reality is that you've got a battle, a proxy war with Ukraine between Russia, a nuclear power, and the proof of weapons network via its host nation, US, with Trump negotiating for the profits of the different faction. Now, the proof of weapon network, basically, all Russia, whoever rushes to get a solution on Ukraine, whether it's Russia or the proof of weapons network, whoever comes first to negotiate loses. Because the longer this goes on to, whoever holds out will basically gain the upper hand over Europe. Because this was about strategically weakening Europe. Europe needs the natural gas from Russia. Eventually, it has to do that because it can't afford the expensive gas from America. So you either get vassalized into the proof of weapons network, which is what's happening, or you partner with BRICS, and the European leaders are all doing the opposite of what is in the interest of the people because they push this narrative that Putin is Hitler. And America's already, through the humiliation ritual at the White House when he invited Zelensky, said that's not the case. And then immediately J.D. Vance came over to Europe and said, all right, and they did the NATO negotiation. And so Europe needs to keep up the narrative, but it's strengthening Russia and it's strengthening the proof of weapons network that BlackRock also came over to visit Keir Starmer. And you've got the Gulf interests because the bailout in UK is happening via Qatar. And then you're getting these destabilization campaigns around immigration that's causing racial tensions and religious tensions within the country. And so these, it's just a portfolio management exercise for BlackRock. Now, Russia is never going to concede to the proof of weapons network because it's a nuclear power. It has no incentive to do that. So none of the peace negotiations lead anywhere because it wants complete submission from NATO and the proof of weapons network that it's not going to expand onto its border. So it's got absolutely no pressure to do that. It can carry this on for as long as possible. Because of its partnership with BRICS, it's got a lower debt to GDP, and it can keep supplying and supporting India, who's a rising force that BlackRock is trying to vassalize as well, which is why you're getting the strategic tension between India and Pakistan. So what did Russia come out, it says that it's starting to build new trade routes with Pakistan as well. And so BRICS is getting stronger and stronger and stronger. Sanctions no longer work. I covered it last week when you've got your 18th round of sanctions from EU. And by having an oil price cap, it destroys Europe and makes the Russian oil cheaper for India and China and allows them to get more reserves, which means that China can now compete with OPEC. And so all of these sanctions are just driving more power into this multipolar world and BRICS. And so, there's no pressure for to do that. Now, the proof of weapons network is crushing it out of Ukraine, is making ginormous profits. The longer this goes on for, the more profits the military industrial complex gets to make, because defense in the China-Taiwan situation is not as profitable. And it's got this final situation of needing the energy from the Middle East for its artificial intelligence. And so it's not going to have the forever war model in the Middle East if you can get Netanyahu to negotiate whatever it is. And he represents military and lost profits as well. And so you're basically in both players. They stand to gain the longer this goes on for. More profits for the proof of weapons network, and more profits for BRICS, and more profits the weaker Europe gets, which will be vassalized either into Russia or the proof of weapons network at the end of this. So it's a completely tragic game, because you've got a corrupt Zelensky that represents the proof of weapons network and the military industrial complex. So both stand to lose if they make a deal. And so you're in a game of chicken where whoever comes first. The proof of weapons network, they lose if they concede on any settlement, because essentially they'd get unnecessary trade, and ongoing profits will just get weaker as a result of that. And so then they can't take over more of the European markets, and they don't get to provide more of the security. And so they want this to go on for as long as possible. And Russia is in basically the exact same situation, where it would unnecessarily give away more than it needs to in Ukraine. And it would have a weaker grip on Europe. And then the proof of weapons network can wash, rinse, repeat a new operation via either Poland. And so it's just a complete tragic game. Both are basically strongly incentivized to reject any kind of peace deal. And if anyone comes to the table, it's basically totally against, and it's basically complete submission by either Russia or the proof of weapons network. So everything you're seeing on media is a complete lie for show. That's why USAID was funding the BBC. That's why 100 journalists retired, because they were being told what to say with their stance on Israel. They're a bit less clued up on the Ukraine side. And that's why it was the Proof of Weapons Network via USAID was funding the Ukrainian media as well, because it needs to fund to the last Ukrainian and make them believe that they're going to support them all the way. So everything on the media is completely for show. It's basically to justify why a resolution can't be reached, and you get the clown show and the theater that we're seeing. In reality, neither player wants a resolution right now. And the Proof of Weapons Network and the military industrial complex is brutal. They've never cared about humans. They care about profits. They'll sacrifice humans. And that's been the complete, indication that we've seen. So basically, I don't know how to tell you this, but US and Europe, they're part of that operation working for BlackRock, and BlackRock wants Ukraine to turn into rubble. And that's the same with the Russian situation because of the NATO expansion. And so Russia basically eventually will have total control of Ukraine, the way that I see this. And it will go on for years because of this game. And eventually Russia will have access to Europe because Europe will be completely economically destroyed the longer this goes on for. And the proof of a weapons network will basically eventually exhaust all of its profits through militarization. And they'll keep sending to the last weapon, and then they can build them again. And eventually, when that happens, after the $1 trillion is printed from the European Central Bank, they'll do a deal. And the deal will hand over to Russia. And so I hate to say this. This is what I've been warning on all along. All of those Ukraine flags in social media, all of the we're defending democracy, all of the was just pure theatrics for the proof of weapons network. And I don't see any recovery for Ukraine from here. And the only way is to gain sovereignty and actually work in the interest of the Ukrainians. And I don't see any of that happening. Europe is the massive loser from this. Europe completely loses. And this is why we're seeing the annihilation of the economies as well. Obviously, the countries that have their own energy, the Baltics, the Norwegians, the Swedish, the Swiss, outside of they're in the European Economic Area, but they're not in the European Union. They have their own currencies. They're independent of this. And Bulgaria just joined, handing over their currency to the European Central Bank, the financial terrorists of the proof of weapons network. So I think we just see a prolonged conflict. They can use this in order to spike energy prices, and that allows for Russia to maintain the economy because of its partnership with BRICS. The higher the price of oil goes, the more it strains oil and gas in Europe, the less they can be involved in the artificial intelligence side, and the more they sign deals with OpenAI and Palantir to get America to provide the oil. And so the complete vassalization into BlackRock. So Europe is being sacrificed. And that's why you're seeing all of these migration crisis talks and fueling the Israeli agents like Tommy Robinson as well. Just look into his background. You can see who he's paid for. And it's just Russian energy leverage and proof of weapons network security dominance. And both of it allows them to tighten their grip on Europe. With no incentive to counter each other. So, in summary, whichever holds out the longest, they get more of Europe. They get the energy deals, they get security deals, and they get to dictate the economic terms with Europe. So the war is going to drag on. And everything that Trump said about ending this war, it wouldn't happen under me. He's an agent for the proof of weapons network. He got NATO to pay. He's sending over the weapons. And he wants it because he wants a GDP print. So you can't trust a damn thing that he's actually saying. Weapons will keep going over to Ukraine. And so Americans, Trump's going to have to keep finding a way of winning the Nobel Peace Prize while sending more and more weapons over to Ukraine and breaking the promise. Because Russia's going to keep pushing as far as I can see. I can't see any incentives anyway. Ukrainian losses will continue to mount. It's a human tragedy. And both players get leverage. Okay, that's Russia and Ukraine. I'm sorry it's so depressing. What else have we got? Okay. So we've done China, Taiwan. We've done Russia, Ukraine. We gave some updates on last week's Syria situation, a little bit of updates on Epstein. In the final section, I just wanted to cover some of the updates of what's happening in the Middle East and Gaza, why this isn't ending. I covered my long-term prediction that this moves towards ceasefire, and that this means that in the end, the GCC becomes the players in the region, is moving towards decolonization, but the military-industrial complex via its proxy, Israel, is making more profit for the US military-industrial complex and a proof of weapons network within US stock market. So in Gaza, I I got the resolution's basically taking longer than I thought it would. I thought we would be somewhere by now. And I think the reason that that's happening is because Netanyahu and his grip on power basically hinges upon the coalition and the cabinet. And there is destabilization in the cabinet that I covered last week, but it's still, he's a political genius as well as a war criminal and genocidal maniac and satanic. But he's managing to keep hold of his control at the moment. And the coalition and between the cabinet and the political pressure is still going. And by keeping the war going, he basically gets to delay any type of accountability for his crimes against humanity, both in the International Criminal Court, which is why Trump is calling Netanyahu a war hero rather than a war criminal, and sanctioning the International Criminal Court. Because I believe there's a negotiation for his exit. And then Netanyahu had to face the court internally for the corruption and blackmail that they've been doing. And the probes are basically being postponed every time he escalates war. So we had the Syria escalation. He took advantage of that. And the more probes that happen, they get delayed, his cases, the longer the war goes on for. So you've literally got someone working in their own self-interest. This has basically happened multiple times now. It looks like we're going to get to a ceasefire. It looks like we get to a negotiation. And then Netanyahu finds a way of holding the cabinet together. And the only way to hold the cabinet is to tell the radical Zionists that they're going to create more war and they're going to take over more land. And so investigations are basically constantly being postponed. And the longer the postponement, the worse the genocide gets. And now they're in the starvation campaign. So he keeps basically repeating this process because this process is working. So even in the UK actually came out and made an announcement from Keir Starmer with a letter saying that this is an unacceptable starvation campaign. And that was the first time that we had such strong language admitting. Now, this starvation campaign has been going on all along. The GCC has been negotiating in order to get aid in. Aid never gets in because Israel controls the borders. The IMF bribed Egypt. Egypt's holding the borders from preventing the ethnic cleansing. Hamas continues to resist. Funding's coming from Qatar. Iran, I believe, has stopped funding at the moment because it's entered into a negotiation. But Netanyahu's resolution needs to be done. And then we had the theater of the Iran-Israel war and the pretense of taking out the nuclear program with the US intervention that I covered in previous broadcasts. But I think Netanyahu is just trying to secure his immunity right now prior to conceding. And this is basically prolonging the timeline. And the military-industrial complex is okay because Israel's spending more. Trump has agreed to send over another $12 billion. The American taxpayer pays. The stock market gets a new print. Israel gets more corrupt money. Military gets to pay, and he gets to negotiate more leverage as well. And so we're in this tragic humanitarian crisis when by default, basically, the proof of weapons network doesn't have the urgency to enforce the peace resolution. And so that's the situation that we're in right now. I personally believe that the GCC has done all the leverage that they've had. They've negotiated all they can. They've done the normalization. China's done the normalization between Saudi and Iran. Iran is playing ball as far as I can see. There's a negotiation around the nuclear program. There has been the taming of the Axis and the Faction. But at the moment, everything's failed to end the disaster. And I still believe that eventually this actually ends with peace for Gaza. But the Americans are involved in the concentration camp operation and the starvation, and the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation continues to sniper people and concentrate 90% of the land. And now we're getting more and more recognition around the world that this genocide is a negotiation with the GCC. I believe everyone's aligned at the moment, with the exception of Netanyahu, and Netanyahu needs to prop up his cabinet, which have been radicalized by the extreme Zionism that agrees to keep power the more Palestinians you kill. And so we had, from France, of all people, France said that they're ready to recognize Palestine as a state. This is actually a very aggressive move from France, actually recognizing it, because France is one of the Security Council members of United Nations. You've got the 5 members: Russia, China, UK, France, and America. America, for decades and decades, has been veto voting any chance of peace or Palestinian self-determination. But UK has tapped out. France started to tap out, and now it's saying that France may recognize Palestine, where 145 countries have done that. That's the majority of the world. And then this would put pressure on UK, which would then, we had, very, very strong language from Keir Starmer. Now, it's just words. At the moment, it's all just words. But if France acts, then UK may need to act. And UK basically said in their words, while they're just words, this is completely indefensible. This is a mass starvation campaign, and people are dying. And never again, the Holocaust from the World War II era is looking identical to the Holocaust that's happening in Gaza right now, inflicted by the Zionist state under the Zionist ideology, backed up by US as a colony that's paying for, so that the proof of weapons network and the military industrial complex can profit. And they are negotiating to buy the freedom of the colonized states that essentially have all the energy that's needed for this artificial intelligence and data centers that need to be built. This is how the US proof of weapons network works. So what I wanted to do is end with a final video and a final AI summary of a blog that I'm going to be releasing next week. And this one is really a practical blog around, once you realize that government are controlled by the proof of weapons network in the West, once you know that, it's pointless engaging in the political process because the uniparty is the same. So what can we engage in? Well, it's actually using our money and boycotting. And so what I wanted to put together as a blog is, firstly, understand the profits that are made from genocide as a service, starvation as a service, occupation as a service. And then we can understand what companies we need to boycott in order to incrementally chip away at their profits. And so there was an amazing paper that listed all the companies, and I'm going to put it together into a blog this week. But I wanted to create a video, and I'm just going to give you the AI summary, and this is going to be the final bit of content that we're going to be covering in This Week in Geopolitics, a Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 91. And so I'm going to play that video now, and then after the video, I'm going to do the closing comments, and that's going to be everything that we're going to do on Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 91. So Azad, let's play the AI summary for the blog that we're going to be releasing next week, and we'll make sure we put the links in the description.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to help you get informed quickly.
And today we're tackling some, well, pretty heavy material.
We are. We're looking at one perspective on how a system termed the Proof of Weapons Network is claimed to profit from global conflict.
Yeah, and our sources for this dive are mainly the work of Simon Dixon and also the really significant research from UN Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese.
Our goal here is simple. Unpack the claims, look at the mechanisms and players mentioned, and understand the potential actions suggested in the material.
Right, just laying out what these sources are saying.
Exactly. So let's start with Simon Dixon's idea, this Proof of Weapons Network. How does he describe it working?
Well, he frames it almost like an investment strategy, a portfolio approach.
A portfolio, but for conflict.
That's the argument, yeah. He suggests top asset managers named like BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard come up essentially use governments,
Okay.
particularly places he calls vassal states, maybe like the US, UK, Israel, to escalate conflicts that benefit the military-industrial complex.
Right. So fueling the conflict machine.
But then, and this is key to his argument, they allegedly profit again from the rebuilding phase afterwards.
Ah, so a double benefit there. First the weapons, then the reconstruction.
Precisely. And in this view, Israel is presented as sort of a central hub, a testing ground almost, for military tech surveillance.
Okay, a very specific and frankly unsettling framework he's putting forward.
It is. And it connects quite starkly with Francesca Albanese's research, which the source material really emphasizes.
How so? What does her work add to this picture?
Well, Albanese's research, as presented, describes a shift. It talks about moving from an economy of occupation, focused on controlling resources, to something darker.
Which is?
She terms it an economy of genocide, implying a systematic profit-driven element behind displacement and destruction.
That's a very strong term.
It is. And she specifically points to Palestine, describing it as a kind of laboratory.
Yeah,
for testing military and surveillance technologies. And critically, she notes, with zero accountability, zero scrutiny. It suggests this isn't accidental, but systemic.
And does she name specific entities involved in this alleged system?
She does, or rather, the source material highlighting her research does. It lists quite a few corporate accomplices, as they're termed.
Like who? What kind of companies?
Well, you've got the obvious ones, maybe. Arms and surveillance firms like Elbit Systems, Lockheed Martin, Palantir, providing tools for, the actual conflict and control.
Makes sense in that context.
And there are machinery and construction companies. Hyundai, Volvo are mentioned, linked in the source to demolition and building settlements deemed illegal.
Okay, so beyond just weapons tech.
Right. And then finance. Big banks and asset managers, BNP Paribas, Barclays, BlackRock, Vanguard again, providing funding, maybe legitimacy.
So the money trail is highlighted.
And it even extends to consumer tech. Think Airbnb, Booking.com, accused of normalizing the occupation via listings online.
Wow, okay, that broadens the scope considerably.
And even universities get a mention for partnerships with the defense sector, which the source claims lends a kind of false sense of neutrality.
So it paints a picture of a very, very interconnected web.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the implication, tying it back, is that maybe governments are less in charge than these large corporate interests driven by shareholders.
Right. Albanese has that quote mentioned in the source, doesn't she, about fingerprints?
Yeah, powerful stuff. If Palestine were a crime scene, it would have the fingerprints of all of us. Really makes you think, about that interconnectedness. What stands out to you listening to this?
It definitely raises the question, if the system is presented as being this vast and profit-driven, what leverage do people actually have? And the source material, through Simon Dixon again, does propose an answer. It focuses on the boycott.
Okay, the economic lever.
Exactly. His argument is basically, this isn't fundamentally about politics or religion for the executives involved. It's about profit. They have a fiduciary duty to shareholders.
A legal duty to maximize returns.
Right. So target the profits.
And there are examples given to back this up, right? That boycotts can work.
Yeah, the source points to Starbucks mentions a 10% share price drop after boycotts, reportedly linked to its CEO's stance on settlements.
We have a recent example.
An historical one.
Yep.
The role boycotts and divestment played in ending apartheid in South Africa. A much larger scale, obviously, but the principle.
The principle that sustained economic pressure can force change.
Yes. So, building on that, Dixon outlines his specific recommendations. His most important boycott list, as the source calls it.
And what does that involve? It's not just consumer brands, I take it.
No, it's more systemic, focused on finance and currency, particularly through Bitcoin. He suggests boycotting the Federal Reserve System by saving in Bitcoin.
Interesting. Decentralizing savings.
Then boycotting asset managers like BlackRock by holding Bitcoin yourself, self-custody.
Taking control away from intermediaries.
Right. Also, boycotting banks by not borrowing against your Bitcoin holdings, keeping that separate.
Reducing reliance on the traditional system.
And finally, a broader boycott of the whole proof of weapons network by choosing to spend locally, consciously, supporting alternatives.
So it's a multi-pronged approach, really.
Yeah.
Disengaging from certain systems,
Yeah.
engaging differently elsewhere.
Exactly. It all circles back to that core idea that if you understand where the profit motive lies, you can potentially identify effective points of pressure. It's about using that knowledge.
Definitely gives you a framework for thinking about action based on the source's perspective. And maybe a final thought to leave you with, reflecting on all this. What could it mean for your own sense of control, your personal sovereignty, to really consciously think about where your money goes, how you save, how you spend, especially with these huge economic and tech shifts happening?
Yeah, how do your own economic choices play into these larger systems? Something to mull over.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. So I'm going to be publishing a blog, and we'll put the link in the description as well as all the links to everything else that was covered in Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 91. It really does feel like an entire movie each and every week, and I hope that you're enjoying that. Please leave some comments below. I do read the comments. Sometimes we get spam attacked, but don't allow that to stop you commenting, because we report them and we delete them when they happen. But sometimes we notice that people stop commenting when we get those spam attack. Please do leave those comments, because we'll go through them. And I like to read them in order to get feedback and reply as well. And it really helps us as well, so that I can make future episodes better for you. So as a quick recap, in part 1 of Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 91, this week in Bitcoin, we covered how the Genius Act could be a US covert central bank digital currency. In part 2, we covered the macro trends. We covered the theater at the Federal Reserve between Jerome Powell and Trump. And we covered a blog of power dynamics and power structure to answer the question around the conspiracy theory, so I can debunk those that say Jews rule the world, and really a more accurate reflection of that. In part 3, we covered this week in geopolitics, and we went through the China-Taiwan situation based upon following the money and the proof of weapons network. We also went through the Ukraine-Russia situation. We went through the update in the Gaza situation, and we gave and ended with an artificial intelligence roundup of a future blog where we can productively understand the companies that we need to boycott, so that we can control money, understanding that governments are subordinate to the proof of weapons power structure. Macro and geopolitics. Always remember, you are alive at one of the most interesting and exciting times in financial history. I want you to share this with as many people, because those who are on the wrong side of the proof of weapons network will get wrecked. Those on the right side are able to be on the right side of this change. And as we transition to this world of Bitcoin AI and central bank digital currencies, I need as many of you to be on the right side. So if you're watching this video, please subscribe on YouTube. We're over 100,000 subscribers now. Our next goal is to get to 210,000 subscribers. If you follow me on X, we also stream it over there, and throughout the week you can get live updates. And actually ask me a question if you come up on one of the spaces. If you need to consume this in parts, I upload the 3 parts separately on YouTube. I also have a podcast on both Spotify and Apple for Bitcoin Hard Talk. You can download it and then listen to it in parts while you're at the gym or while you're driving. And in case all of that gets barred, we've got a couple of backups. We stream live on Rumble. I need to build my following there, so please follow me if you use Rumble. And then finally, make sure you got a membership at simondixon.com at the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal. This way, I'll send you a newsletter with all updates and give you lots of goodies and everything. If all goes wrong, we'll be streaming from there as well, because we built a whole infrastructure for that. That's everything for this week in Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 91. We do this with peace, love, and unity. And I'll see you this time next week for episode 92. Peace.